Hello and welcome to the Good Practice Podcast, a weekly show about work, performance and learning. I'm Ross Dickie, and this week we're discussing the role of emotion in the workplace. Fresh from his holiday, I'm joined by fellow podcast host Ross Garner. Hello, Ross.
Hello, Ross. I am looking fresh. Thank you for noticing.
Fresh as a daisy. Along with return guest Phil Willcox, founder of Emotion at Work and host of the Emotion at Work podcast. Hello, Phil.
Hello, Ross. How are you?
Very well.
Phil, you were once a frequent flyer on this podcast, so I've looked back and seen when your previous episodes were. So there's episode number 50, which was live from a park in London.
It was live from a park in London.
It was very windy, so I think most of your input was cut, but it was all gold. And then episode 58, you came and talked about deception, and then again you appeared on our live episode number 93. And I was digging around trying to work out why you fell out of favour and haven't been on in the past, 60 episodes, something like this. And I realised that it was a week after your last appearance, we had the greatest controversy of our age. We had the whether the computer-generated voice was saying Yanni or Laurel. And I don't think we ever resolved that conflict between us. But welcome back.
You buried the hatchet.
Thanks. I'm delighted to be back in my best friend of the show.
Yes, exactly. Well, let bygones be bygones.
and I'll do my best not to take over hosting. As well,
that was the other thing.
We have 3 podcast hosts on the show, so what could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? So, Ross, where are we beginning?
Well, Phil, thank you for asking. So, as I just said, you are founder of a company called Emotion at Work, and you host a podcast of the same name. So do you want to just get us started by explaining what sparked your interest in that topic?
So I know that you are a family-friendly podcast. So parts of the story that I'm about to share for why emotion, then I will edit out for the purposes of the family-friendly audience that we have. So in part, it is because I've always been fascinated by people. So when I was a teenager, and I think I was 14, one of my friends came up to me and said, "How is it that you can just go and sit with like the football team, and then the rugby team, and then a group of girls, and then the geeks, and then the what in Bristol we would call the hard nuts?" So they were like kind of the tough bully type kids, and you can just go and sit with all those people and be okay. You could just fit in. I said, "Well, anyone can do that." And he said, "No, nobody really can do that." So I thought, well, that's quite interesting. I wonder why that is. So I then decided to do sociology for one of my A-levels, and it was rubbish because it was all about sociological sociology. So it's Marxism and Leninism and all of that. Oh no, man! There's me saying it's the family-friendly show, and then I've thought because it was all about
bleep it.
It was all about Marxism and Leninism and all of that stuff, which I wasn't really interested in. So I then went to join the game for World of Work, and then when I was 20 or 19 or 20, I was on the phone to a customer, and after about 40 minutes of being on the phone, we were going round and round in circles, disagreeing about whether what we as the company had done was the right thing or not. And then I pressed the mute button on my kind of tell set, and I then told the customer, "Why don't you just shut and stop?" And to which the customer then said, "Pardon." And I looked over and looked at my mute button, and it wasn't lit. I was like, "Oh man, now I'm in trouble." And that's a much shorter version of a longer story. But the upshot of that was I didn't get fired, which I really should have done. And I made a vow that emotion would never get the better of me. That was the kind of day I was like, right, emotion's never going to get the better of me again. Because I was really cross. I was just really annoyed with this customer, with this lady. And that then took me on a real kind of a self-driven fascination and research into the whole world of emotion then. And then it's just kind of gone on and on and on from there. And then the more I read, the more I studied, the more I noticed is that in the workplace in general, you're allowed to be happy. That's okay. You can be happy in the workplace. And you can be passionate, and you can be determined, but you can't be angry, you can't be scared, and you can't be offended, and you can't be, contemptuous or smug or any of those things. Yet human beings in the workplace are all of those things all of the time. And with the general narrative being that emotions aren't something that we should have in the workplace, I would argue, then I decided, you know what, there's something I want to do about that, and I want to change that narrative. And I started, so initially the company that I run, which I started up in 2011, wasn't called Emotion at Work. It was called something else. And then I rebranded it in 2016 because I wanted to be a bit more Ron Seal in that way, to be, you know what, I just want this is what I focus on. This is what I'm about. And if you don't like that, then that's okay. And there's some pieces of work that I haven't won because I'm so overt in the way that I talk about emotion.
I wonder if you said that being happy in the workplace is acceptable. Happiness to a point, I think, is probably true, but you can't be having or seem to be having a great time all the time. And I think probably the more senior that you go in organizations, like a lot of our projects will work with directors or even sort of CEOs and so on. And I wouldn't say that they come across as particularly happy. They're sort of very objective and neutral, or portray themselves as very it's that sort of calm professional look all the time. It's like, I wonder how far emotions are considered bad in general.
So I think they are. I think in general, the only emotion that is credible, maybe that's a reframe I should put around it. The main emotion that's credible in the workplace is happiness. I think if you start to bring in others, then it becomes more troublesome for people. And this is where I get interested in some of the sociological aspects of identity then, because it might be that we are feeling a particular way, but our identity in the workplace, because we have to portray this calm and professional demeanor, that inhibits us from displaying or discussing or exploring the other emotions that we may be feeling at that particular time, because we think it's a risk to our credibility and our identity if we do so.
Yeah, I think that credibility risk is actually what I mean by appearing too happy. It's like if you're so happy at work,
you're not taking it seriously enough.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're being distracted, or it's not serious.
Yeah. I mean, I think professional, the way that we think of professionalism is sort of bound up with showing no emotion, and sort of it's traditionally, I think, been seen as the home is the place for emotion and the workplace is for reason. And but yeah, as you said, where we work and the way that we work and the places that we choose to work, these are all sort of emotional things. We spend a great portion of our lives doing these things, and sort of it's on the one hand, it's unreasonable to expect people not to show any emotions at work, but then you can also see why that has evolved over time. So, you can see that if people are constantly grappling with complex emotions at work, that it could be distracting and not necessarily in the best interest of the company. So I think you probably push back on that a little bit.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to be invited to go and talk at a conference over in Iceland last year, and as part of the which I'm conscious is a bit of a clang. There was a bit of a kind of a drop thing. Oh, look, I've been to Iceland to speak at a conference. But I'm going to move on from that.
You're very impressive, Phil.
Thanks. So the reason I share that in particular was as part of the preparation for that, I came up with a three statement or three utterance approach to emotion in the workplace, which is be heard, safe space, and move on. So the idea around be heard is that those emotions that people experience in the workplace, they need to be heard some way, somehow. Because if they don't, what happens is we get to the point where what emotional researchers would call flooding out episodes occur. So flooding out episodes are where you have that overflow of emotion. So anger could boil over into where somebody kind of hits, and again, there's going to be, when I use this imagery, there's going to be sociological constructs that people are going to put together to make people male or female, but we'll go with that anyway. So if anger boils over and somebody hits the table, storms out of the room, or starts shouting at somebody else, what that is, that's not a single discrete anger episode that person is experiencing. What that is a combination or a build-up of a multitude of episodes that have made that person maybe frustrated or annoyed, but because they can't show it, because that emotion can't be heard anywhere, it then ends up coming out in a very destructive way. And Ross, Dickie Ross, earlier on, you mentioned the word emotional, and that is a really interesting one because the word emotional often collocates with women more than men. So if you did a corpus linguistics approach and you look for the word emotional, especially if you went for the corpus of business speech within in English anyway, it would collocate with more she, her type pronouns than it would with him, his, he type pronouns. So the be heard bit, if we don't do that, if we don't have a way of letting that emotion be heard, and that could be, with someone's line manager, or it could just be that, somebody reflects on it, or they talk about it out loud, or they talk about it at home, or whatever it is. But the more that emotion is pushed down, and then if it happens again, it's pushed down again, and it's pushed down again and again and again and again, eventually it will flood out in whatever way. Now, I'm also conscious that when I said flooding out earlier on, that got giggles from both of you. So tell me more about the giggles that we had when I said flooding out.
Oh, I did it last night. That's what I was thinking about. And I think listening to you is particularly true or difficult for home workers, which as a home worker, that's obviously something that I think about a lot. But no one ever knows what your workload is like. And they don't know, they don't get any of the sort of non-verbal cues that you would get from looking over and saying, oh, that person's really busy. They look really stressed. Maybe I will save this particular request for now. But I have, because I've just come back from 2 weeks on holiday, and my boss, James McCluckey of this podcast fame, is on holiday right now. So a lot of the questions that we normally go to James have come to me instead, whilst also catching up on the backlog on the previous the 2 weeks I was off. And I think that I have been absolutely fine at work and just make a decision. Okay, here's my response. Make a decision, right? Make a response. Make a decision. Here's a response. And then last night, my wife was like, what time's the MOT tomorrow? And I was like, I don't know when the MOT is tomorrow. I've been making decisions all day at work. I can't make a decision now about the MOT. And she was like, what's happening? And it was pretty obvious what had gone on, but that was what prompted my giggles, was it resonated immediately with my experience.
Yeah, and that's a really good example, and the kind of the whichever metaphor you want to use, the straw breaking the camel's back or whatever it is, that's the bit that bothers me around emotion. So what I'm sometimes people say, well, you're advocating that everybody should just say what they feel and show what they feel all the time without any censorship. I'm like, no, but at the same time, that's one end of the spectrum, is we openly and overtly talk about or display what we feel every single second of every single day. The other end of the spectrum is what I think happens in most workplaces at the moment, which is where, generally speaking, we don't talk about it, we keep it hidden, we keep it discreet, we push it down, we suppress or repress it. And what I'm saying is, surely there's got to be somewhere in the middle where I can talk about how I feel. Yes, I need to think about how I do that in a way that is constructive, but actually neither ends of those spectrum I think are helpful, and there's got to be somewhere in the middle that I think is a more beneficial place to be.
Yeah, because it's going to come out somewhere, right? And the norm is to not express at work that actually you just need everyone to back off for an hour or so while you kind of calm down and catch up with some stuff. But because you can't do that, then it does come out at home, and that's a problem.
Maybe not even at home. I mean, I think, the sort of pop psychology explanation of your outburst at Amy is that you bottled things up and felt like you weren't able to say, I'm too stressed right now to deal with this. I'll get back to you tomorrow or something. I think there's sort of a feeling that I think it's very difficult actually to say something like that to your colleagues, and that you also sort of don't want to feel like you're letting people down, probably. I think you probably also feel, to sort of psychoanalyze you, responsibility to step into James's shoes while he's on holiday.
Oh yeah, that's certainly the case. And I haven't slept in 3 days because of the weather. We're recording this in the middle of the heat spell, so there's all these kind of things at play.
Yeah. But I mean, people sort of, I was thinking about this in a slightly different way, just about the sort of different personalities or identities that people bring to work and have in other aspects of their life. And there's something I noticed recently. I've been over in the US for the past couple of months, and whenever I'm there, people always comment on the fact that my accent becomes more American. And then as soon as I got back to Scotland, within about a day, I was speaking to my girlfriend. She said, "Oh, you already sound way more Scottish."
Okay, the new.
Okay, the new. But I've noticed that there's a good practice way of speaking, that I sort of initially picked up on myself. Just sort of certain words that we'll use that are sort of the good practice way of communicating, that I don't use in any other context. So say, for example, the word grand. I never said grand at all before joining Good Practice. And yet, I think, I would attribute a lot of this to James. James is haunting this podcast, but I would attribute a lot of that to James McCluckey. And I would say it's not even always in speech. It's sometimes just, a message on Slack, people respond saying grand. And I never use that with, sort of speaking to my girlfriend or speaking to my friends outside of work. And that's just one example, I think, of
I did that this morning too. I think I said grand to you, and I would never say that to anyone else.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's like lots of little kind of, this is the sort of way that people communicate here, and you sort of, it's more like code switching, I guess, than it's kind of more like a linguistic thing, possibly. And the way that I become more American when I'm in America. But it's interesting how people sort of naturally do that. And I guess people also have, a version of themselves that they want to present to their colleagues. They want to be seen as professional. And part of that, as we've explained, is not showing too much emotion at work.
And there will be different constraints different expectations depending on the context that you're in. So part of, so you're right, so the use of the word grand is, that is in part to do with identity. It's also to do with kind of signifying group status. So, a linguist would say, what each individual organization often does, and sometimes even subgroups within an organization will have a particular way of speaking. So, the word to discern agreement, or not discern, the word to display agreement is grand within Good Practice, but in other contexts it might be something different, and that can vary from organization to organization. But what you learn is that that's the word that people use, and if I use that word, I'm more likely to fit in, and therefore I fit in. Now, is that learning conscious? Is that deliberate? Do people go, I wonder let me have a look at what language everybody's using and see what language I need to use so I can make sure that I can fit in. Some people will do that on a deliberate, purposeful way. Other times it just happens kind of by osmosis. You pick it up, you notice it, and then you join in because you want to be as part of the crowd and not standing out separately. And if you want to know more about that, then you could listen to episode 6 of the Emotional Work podcast with a forensic linguist of Dr. Samuel Larner.
Shameless. Bill, I think you said you were going to talk about 3 areas earlier on, and so that you discussed
yes.
one of them, and then you, because me and Ross both giggled, you turned that on to us. I was wondering what the other 2 were.
I turned that on to you. So the first one was Be Heard. The second one was... So Be Heard is the first one. Safe space is the second one. So safe spaces then is to do with creating those spaces or those environments where people can talk about how they feel. And it's where can those safe spaces be? So that safe space could be a virtual space, it could be a physical space, it could be with a particular person, it could be someone's line manager, it could be a colleague, it could be a peer. But it's about saying, what are we doing as organizations or as teams or as individuals to make sure we've got somewhere that we can go and we feel like we can talk in an open and safe way about what it is that we're thinking or what it is that we're feeling. And then those 2 things together, if the emotion is heard and expressed in a safe space, then that helps people to move on. And what it means is that they carry less of that baggage around with them. So it could be that, so if I think back to my employed days, there was one individual who I worked with who I really struggled to get, and I really struggled to kind of work well with, because they did something in the early days of my employment that really annoyed me, and I held on to that for a long time. But everybody else really liked that person. So this was my issue. Everyone else loved that person. They thought, this person's great, they're amazing, they're brilliant at their job. And I was like, no, they were really horrible to me, or at least what they did I interpreted as really horrible. So I didn't have anywhere to kind of go with that, and I couldn't talk to anybody about it. So I didn't really ever move on from it until I left the organisation. And I was like, oh look, I don't have to worry about that anymore because that person's not part of my life, so therefore that's all good. For me, if we can do those 3 simple things, I say simple, but if we can do the 3 simple things of making sure that the emotions can be heard, giving people a safe space in which to do that, and then that will help them or encourage them to move on from whatever that episode was, so that they've then got more capacity to kind of deal with other emotional stuff in the future.
Yeah, and I guess whose responsibility is it to provide that safe space? Is that role for HR to take up? Does L&D have responsibility?
So I think it depends. So I think there's individual kind of accountability or individual agency within it as well. So part of it is about, right, where is mine? Where do I, so when I'm having one of those days where it's really hard for me to concentrate on what it is that I'm trying to do because there's just something that's niggling away at me and really bothering me, where do I go to allow that to be heard? What do I do? So one of my strategies is, and it's a bit weird, but I think I get away with it. So I go out walking with my earphones plugged in, and I audio record what I'm thinking into my earphones as I'm out walking, and then I listen back to it later. So if I haven't physically got someone to go and talk to, I will go and talk it out to myself on an audio recording. And then I can come back and listen to it later, and then I can. So there's the kind of just there's the sharing of it, even though nobody's actually listening apart from me, and there's the opportunity to listen back to it and identify kind of what else was happening or what else was going on when that was occurring. So there might be something for each individual to do to go, right, when I'm having one of those, something's really niggling and bothering me and I'm struggling to focus or concentrate, where can I go? Where's my safe space that I can allow stuff to be heard? Yes, I think there's potentially a role for organizations within that then, so organizations as a whole, and then with for HR and or L&D folk within that. Because I think, so L&D folk get involved a lot with, I don't know, organizational change. That's riddled with emotion. They get involved with learning and development. That's riddled with emotion, and if you pay attention to, say, what Nick Shackleton-Jones is talking a lot about at the moment with his effective context model, what underpins that, he says, is emotion. Emotion is the thing that underpins the learning that goes with it. So, therefore, I don't necessarily agree with everything that Nick says, by the way, but I'm just using that as an example.
But if anyone's interested, I think it was episode 149 of this podcast that Nick came on to talk about that.
Wonderful, thank you. He also did it on an episode of the Emotional Work podcast as well. But anyway, I didn't get in first or anything in that one. But anyway, or whether it be leadership development or whether it be, and even then if you think about and I think this might have been talked about in episode 149 of the GoodPractice podcast, when you talk about things like mandatory learning, like compliance or, how to deal with phishing emails or that sort of stuff. Often you want people to connect at an emotional level. So if you can, so I think there is a role then for learning and development within it to think, right, if we're doing these things, they will bring emotion with them, whether we like it or not. So how do we help people work with it in that way? And likewise for HR folk, then in terms of the work that they do, again, if you think about all of the stuff that I used to get involved in when I was head of HR then around disciplinaries, grievances, recruitment, culture change, all of that stuff, that's all about emotion. That's what it all is. So it has to be a big part of what we do. And that's part of the reason that, I want to do more in the HR and learning and organizational development fields, because whether we like it or not, we are involved in emotion in most minutes of most days. So if we understand more about it, if we know how to work with it as individuals and then how we can help other people work with it as well, then I think that will make for better workplaces for everybody.
I think it's something where, the creating of the safe space is, I've never actually worked with you, Phil, but I think that's broadly what your company does. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we have GoodPractice in the past used Julie Dryborough, who's been on this podcast a few times, to create that space for us. Because I think what we found is that when we get together by ourselves, the conversation tends to get very project focused. What needs to happen when and who's going to be responsible for what. And actually we don't have that opportunity to express emotions because I think we all probably in that context act quite professional. Maybe that's not the right word, but I think that's what we're trying to do. Whereas what we've tended to do maybe twice a year, certainly on the content team at GoodPractice, is get out of the office entirely, get everyone together so you don't have the kind of that barrier of having some people remote and some people local and having all the tech get in the way. And then we've had to have someone external in the room, in this case, Julie Dryborough, to help us express ourselves. Because if we're left to our own devices, then we start going back to project work and what needs to happen. And even when you're talking about ideas around projects, which is part of the fun part of what we do, I think people are willing to express ideas, but they ultimately defer to the hierarchy.
Leadership. Yeah, I think that's one of the great things about having somebody like Julie come in, is that she does sort of disrupt the hierarchy. And because, if she weren't to lead those sessions, then the role would naturally fall to, a manager within the team. And then I think there's certain things that people will feel comfortable saying to Julie that they wouldn't necessarily say directly to their line manager.
But I think the line manager can be in the room, though.
Yes.
Being in that safe space means that it creates that atmosphere where you can say those things.
Yeah.
Or even if you could say those things outside of that room, it probably would never occur to you because you're professional, Ross. You're
right.
not. You're not part of the Good Practice family, Ross.
Grand.
And I think so. There's a number of different things that are wrapped up in that. So, and this is where, so emotional intelligence is a really interesting topic for me, because on one hand, you've got someone like you've got the likes of Daniel Goleman that popularized what emotional intelligence was in a big broad way. He was the first kind of the big pop psychology type author who got emotional intelligence out there. And then you've got someone like, say, Rob Breener, who I believe has also been on the Good Practice podcast. And I will just give Ross some time so that he can find the episode.
I don't think he has, actually.
Has he not?
No, I don't think he's ever been on.
Oh, right, okay. Who has put together a thorough kind of interrogation into is emotional intelligence actually a thing. Now, the challenge with that,
it is something you hear a lot when emotional intelligence is referenced these days, about how far it exists, or how far even it's just a useful model, whether it exists or not.
Yes, and part of the challenge is that there are so many different dynamics that are at play. So, and you listed a number of them there. So you listed power as one. So power is a dynamic in those off-site type meetings, or in those organizational meetings where you have a head of, or a manager, or a leader, or whatever their title may be. That brings with it power dynamics, because they have that. Now, what Julie does really well is she disrupts that power dynamic slightly, by taking on the role of leading that particular session, but also she creates the environment that allows people to speak in a way that they may not do if it was just them with their peers and their manager alone in the room together. So what's happening is she's disrupting that, as well as creating the environment that allows that to happen. So you're right, so there's a number of different things that sit within it. But if you read Goleman's book, for example, about what he defines emotional intelligence as, power wouldn't sit in it at all. Well, actually, not power wouldn't. Power doesn't sit in it at all, and that's a massive miss for me, because what a lot of emotional intelligence models do is they look at emotions, or they look at interaction between human beings in a very abstract way. So they look at them outside of context, and they look at them outside of goals. So what's the goals of the individuals that are involved in the interaction? What context are they in? And all of that then starts to shape what people may do. So if you looked at the research that challenges if emotional intelligence is even a thing, there's general agreement around emotional intelligence is made up by a number of the big 5 personality traits, but that doesn't necessarily mean just because that's someone's personality trait means there is a degree of emotional intelligence there. So is emotional intelligence a thing? It's got a term, and it's got people that have definitions for it, but for me, a lot of those definitions are missing elements. So a lot of emotional intelligence models come from a psychology background, but actually there is a whole sociological construct around emotion, and that's missed, I think, in a lot of the emotional intelligence models that are out there.
I think part of the skepticism around it probably also comes down to the fact that I think when it was initially popularized, there was a lot of enthusiasm about it, and this is a kind of, as we have a tendency to do, jump on it as this is the silver bullet that will solve everything. And then there's also for people like Daniel Goleman, whether or not you buy into emotional intelligence as a construct, there's obviously a sort of, he has a vested interest in saying that it is a thing and it is going to lead to sort of, selecting people or recruiting based on emotional intelligence is going to lead to all these huge benefits to your organization. I think that it exists. I mean, for me anyway, I think it exists as a thing, in that people can be emotionally intelligent, but I think it starts to fall apart a little bit the more you dig into it and start to think of it as something that can be learned.
Oh, that's a bold statement there, Mr. Dickie.
I wonder how far the objection to it is if it's implemented from a financial point of view. We want people to be more emotionally intelligent because then they're going to increase their productivity and we're going to make a fortune, versus creating a better working experience for the people who we surround ourselves with. So one of the best exercises that we did with Julie was we all in our team told the story of our lives, and some people had kind of drawn it, and sort of I didn't appreciate the level of preparation other people were doing for this, and turned up with I think a sort of scrunched up piece of paper with some scribbles on it. But that exercise has permanently changed the way that I perceive some people on our team for the better. In the sense that I know stuff about them that never would have come up in an ordinary work context. I feel like I get on much better with them than I did before. And I don't know that there's a measurable productivity improvement there, but my working life is better because we did that exercise. And that really resonated with me over the longer term as well. It's not one of these exercises that you do at one of these away days and then you forget about.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I thought it was really beneficial as well. So we'll move on now to what I learned this week, our regular feature where we share something we've picked up in the past 7 days. Ross, do you want to get started?
Yes. So I have been off for the past 2 weeks and I've been catching up on all sorts of media and consuming lots of different fun stuff. So I thought I would just...
Economics reference, everybody.
Do you know, I have got back onto Economics. It's not on this little list that I've got, but they had an excellent episode recently about a diet pill. Anyway, I'm not recommending it formally as my what I learned this week. Sorry. Economics is worth listening to. So I went to the cinema to see Apollo 11, which is a documentary that uses archive footage and voice material from the time only. So there's no new interviews or anything like that. But it looks incredible. A lot of the launch was shot in 17mm film, which is like what Christopher Nolan does to make his films look amazing. And it still looks incredible today. So I know a lot of people are probably sick of Apollo 11 at this point, but it looks amazing. And if you can catch it in the cinema, it's worthwhile to see it on the big screen and with a massive sound system. I'd like to recommend a podcast, 13 Minutes to the Moon, from the BBC World Service. Again, it's Apollo 11, goes into somewhat granular detail, but it gives a great insight into some of the other people who are involved, not just in the lunar module, but kind of 400,000 other people who got 2 men onto the moon. And it's got music by Hans Zimmer, so there's lots of, like Brahms, with all the exciting moments. So that's good. Music, I've discovered that when Scarlett Johansson was 24 years old, she released an album of Tom Waits covers. Surely the most pretentious project someone could do, but I'm really enjoying it. So there'll be a link to that in the show notes.
Wow.
And I read Wild Harbour by Ian McPherson. Have you read this, Ross? I think you'd like it.
I have not.
So it was written in 1936, and it's a story of a couple who flee a coming war by hiding in the Scottish Highlands. It's all about how they live off the land whilst avoiding increasing numbers of people who are passing through. And it was really apocalyptic, but excellent. Really enjoyed it. So a few recommendations there.
We'll put links to all of those in the show notes. Phil, what did you learn this week?
That even in one of my favourite industries, the morals and scruples of ice cream vendors is questionable. So I love ice cream, and I can eat ice cream any day of the week, and literally twice on a Sunday. And I was told that there was a new ice cream parlour that had opened in a nearby town. So I went to said ice cream parlour. They had a mix of scoop-based ice cream, or you could have your traditional kind of Mr. Whippy. So I said, right, I'll have a double, please. So I'll have a double cone with a double, and they said, oh, do you want a double flake? I said, oh, yes, please. And the extra flake was 30 pence. Now that was a bit like, 30 pence for a flake? I'm not sure about that. But okay, I'll go with it. Now, I then proceeded to find out that each of my flakes was triangular in shape. So whilst flakes are not rigidly, they're not uniformly square, the ice cream vendor had, in my humble opinion, got his flakes cold enough that he could slice them in half and then give half a flake positioned as a whole flake. And I could not believe it. If it hadn't been 30 odd degrees and my ice cream was melting, I would have found a way to take a photo of the flakes to share on Twitter my disbelief in the ability of an ice cream vendor to try and cut costs in such a shockingly poor way.
Well, Phil, these are uncertain times, and people have to protect themselves against whatever might happen in the coming months.
I know. What's the emotion going on there? I mean, honestly, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, charge me 40p. Just charge me 40p for a full flake, rather than charge me 30p.
In support of ice cream vendors, I was recently, on a rare occasion, out. And the next morning I went and got an ice cream at 10 in the morning, and the guy gave me an incredibly judgmental look as I kind of came in, somewhat reeking and begging for an ice cream before he had even opened his cafe. But he gave me a second scoop for free. That's how bad I looked.
Oh, look at that. You're saving the identity of ice cream vendors up and down the country there. What about you, Ross?
Well, regular listeners of the podcast will know that I have a love-hate relationship with my Apple Watch, and that I am also not above reusing it for multiple What I Learned This Weeks. So, however, that journey has come to an end. I recently lost my Apple Watch while traveling to Washington, D.C., was going through security and left it in the tray. And rather than replacing it with a new Apple Watch, I have decided to opt for a £7 Casio vintage digital item. And it does everything I need it to for running. It tells the time. It has a stopwatch. That's about it. It even has an alarm. I haven't used the alarm. And initially, there was a phase in between getting this new watch and losing the Apple Watch where I went for a run, and it was very strange going for a run without a watch on. My body didn't quite know how to.
It's like it doesn't matter.
Started. Yeah,
this run doesn't count. It's not being recorded anywhere.
Yeah. Well, basically the Apple Watch I'd got through our health insurance provider, and the deal is basically if you do enough exercise each week, then you don't have to pay any more than the initial £60 up front. So I found that my motivation for running was entirely based on getting enough points each week to meet these criteria. And yeah, since losing the Apple Watch, I've discovered that I can run for less than 30 minutes if I want to, or more than 30 minutes if I want to, and it doesn't make any difference to me financially. And I find that I'm enjoying running much more, and I also don't have an extra item to charge every night. So yeah, I will not be replacing it. The saga has come to an end. And that's all for this week. If you'd like to share your thoughts on the show, you can find us on Twitter. Ross is
at Ross Garner GP.
Phil is
at Phil Willcox.
And I am at Ross_Dickie. You can also tweet at GoodPractice or at GoodPracticeAUS. To find out more about GoodPractice, our performance support toolkit, bespoke e-learning, and LMS, visit goodpractice.com. Phil, do you have anything you want to plug?
So part of the work that I want to do around changing the narrative around emotions in the workplace is I've set up a community. So it's called the Emotion at Work Hub, which you can find at emotionatwork.co.uk/hub. So you can join for free, and what you'll find in there is curated resources. So it's got everything from podcasts to academic research, journals, through to blogs, press articles. So if it's to do with emotion in the workplace, then you can find it in there. Recently, there was a particular focus on something called imposter syndrome. So there's a number of different resources on that. But yeah, join for free. Lots of resources to do with emotion in the workplace that can be found for you there.
Great. And we'll put links to that in our show notes. Next week, Ross G and Owen will be back with guest Julie Dirksen to discuss behaviour change. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.